Hello everyone, and welcome to another video from the Tiny Menagerie. In these days of ever-increasing bills, it can feel a little bit like every hobby is just getting way too expensive, but that really doesn't need to be the case with fish keeping. In this little video, we're going to be taking a look at wonderfully cheap and cheerful little fish that will give you years of delight without breaking the bank. And in order to qualify for this, each species tends to be less than £3 each, and they do also tend to be the types of species that you buy in groups, so you often get them for deals like 6 for £15 for example. And so, here are my top 10 cheap and cheerful little fish. You couldn't have a list like this without including zebra danios. They're just such a classic, and so we're going to go to them first. They are renowned for being cheap, very hardy, and very easy fish to keep. They have more energy than you'd think is possible for such a small creature, and they add so much movement and vibrance to a tank. They're just so frenetic all of the time. That does mean if you're going for a nice, calm ambiance in your tank, then these probably aren't the fish for you, but if action and energy are what you're after, then they could be just right. They also have the added benefit that they don't need to be in a heated tank in order to thrive, and so, if you're looking to keep your running costs to an absolute minimum, then this species could save you a bucket there as well. And the same goes for the next fish on my list too. Golden barbs are perfectly happy in an unheated tank, so long as the water doesn't drop below about 16 degrees. They are a little larger than the other fish on this list, and a particularly chunky female can reach up to 3 inches in length, although to be honest, they tend to max out closer to 2 inches really. Either way though, they do need a slightly larger tank with at least 80 centimeters in length, just so that they've got enough space. They're also still quite an active species, if not quite so much as a zebra danio, and they do have a lovely strong schooling habit, so you'll often see them out and about in the open, searching together around the tank looking for food. And as well, being golden, these fish certainly do stand out in the crowd. If you're looking for a bit of a showstopper, a group of these just looks fantastic together. Which, in all honesty, is the absolute polar opposite of the next fish in my list. The extremely diminutive Exclamation rasbora is a nanofish to the extreme, with adults barely making 20 millimeters in length. But what they lack in size, they make up for in being perfectly formed and a delight to watch as they navigate around a tiny little nano tank. These minuscule micro-predators are probably the most difficult species to find on the list, but when they are available they tend to be very cheap because they are so very, very small, but they are certainly well worth it as such a tiny investment. And they also have the added benefit that you can keep them in much smaller tanks than the other fish on the list. But if you're looking for something that's not quite so teensy tiny, then black neon tetras are another species that is unobtrusive. In a heavily planted tank you tend to notice them much later rather than sooner. And like most tetras, they are inherently lazy and quite happy to just gently school around in the tank waiting for food to appear in front of them. With their deep bodies in this lovely dark slatish black and that flash of vibrant blue, they can look rather sultry, especially in a dimly lit tank. They only grow to about 1.5 inches in length, and they look particularly stunning when schooling together as a large group, much like the next fish on my list. Corydoras are hugely popular in the hobby for good reason, thanks to their squat, squarish body shape, goofy little faces, and a love of snuffling around in the substrate looking for fallen food. There are many different species to choose from, some of which can get fiendishly expensive, but there's also the other end of that scale, and the cheapest of them all tends to be either the pepper cory or the albino cory. And another advantage of the pepper cory, other than just being rather cheap, is that they tend to stay quite small compared to, say, a stir-by, which can become really quite large and chunky. They are also readily available, whereas some of the other cories can be quite a challenge to find. Cories, though, are tough and hardy little catfish that thrive in a wide range of different conditions. They are very brave and happy to be out and about in the open at all times. Just be sure to keep them in a group with at least 4 to 6 individuals, because Corys really do need the company of their own kind in order to be happy. They are remarkably sociable little fish. And back on the teeny tiny fish front, you can't go far wrong with an Ember tetra. These little tetras only grow to about an inch in length, and that would be quite a large individual at that, to be honest. They have a lovely, deep, burnished, bronzy orange coloration that's really quite rare in the hobby, where reds and yellows tend to be more common. Just be aware though that they are a little bit more sensitive than the other species on this list. They do need a very well-cycled and mature tank to thrive, but once they're settled they are remarkably long-lived, especially for such a small fish, with my oldest now pushing about 5 years. And she's still going strong, which just goes to show what great value they really are. Perhaps you're looking for something that's not quite so normal and fishy, you're looking for something that's a little bit of an oddball, though still not an expensive fish. Then Kuhli loaches are just about as odd as you're going to find. They're strange enough to stand out, but they don't need a very specialised tank in order to keep them happy. In fact, so long as the tank you provide them with has plenty of places for them to hide and slink around, all sorts of objects such as rocks and driftwood, then they tend to be very easy to keep and will largely look after themselves. You just need to make sure that enough food is drifting down for them from the surface, right down onto the substrate, because they won't take food from anywhere else. You do often see them for sale as the tiniest, most insignificant puny stripy worms you can imagine, but they grow surprisingly quickly and they soon fatten up into chunky little eels that also have absolutely bags of character and I think one of the cutest faces that there is. And the next fish on my list might be just slightly more expensive than the others, as they tend to be priced around the £6 mark. But they give so much in terms of their character and beauty that I felt they deserved an honourable mention. And of course, honey gourami are also very long-lived. My oldest lived to be about 10 years old, and even then, I am not convinced it actually died from old age. And so, these beautiful little fish give you years and years and years of enjoyment, and so for a measly £6, that's really not to be sniffed at. And that actually goes for a lot of the other gouramis too. They are a really long-lived family. But honey gourami are also one of the smaller ones, and so they can be kept in a medium-sized tank of about 40 litres, which makes them considerably cheaper to house than a pearl gourami, for example, which grows to be 3 times the size and needs a tank 10 times the size. Now, like a lot of their other Barbie cousins, cherry barbs are both cheap and very, very robust. They are slightly smaller than their golden barb cousins and considerably slimmer in shape, so they don't feel like they take up quite so much tank space in the same way. They are also a little bit less energetic than the goldens, still active and almost always on the go, just without quite so much blundering about. Cherries are a bit more considered and sedate. They move like they actually know where it is that they're going. Plus, with cherry barbs, you also get the fact that they come in 2 different colours. Females are this lovely golden brown, whereas the males are a striking red, making them something of a 2-for-1 species. In fact, the most challenging aspect of keeping cherry barbs is finding good examples of them. You will see many fish food brands, for example, advertising as bringing out the red coloration of your fish. But in my experience, the only way to get really red cherry barbs is to buy from a good breeder, which can mean doing a little bit of research and maybe paying just a little bit more than you would do for the really cheapy ones. And last of all on this list, and actually probably the cheapest fish of them all, I have seen Glowlight tetras for sale for a measly 90p, which is a tad undeserved. They are certainly worth a lot more than that. They might not be the flashiest or the most standout of fish, but Glowlight tetras are hardy. They are very pretty with this lovely orange streak, and they're a species that gets better as they get older as well. In the shops they can look quite pale and unhappy, but you put them into a planted tank and they really come into their own with their lovely soft nature, that vibrant stripe and a supremely easygoing ambience that they create. They are the perfect fish for you if you're into your aquascaping. They bring movement and a bit of colour without overshadowing your precious manicured landscape. And certainly there are an awful lot of cheap fish out there if you look for them. Fish keeping and aquariums in general doesn't need to be a super fancy, super expensive hobby. The smaller, more common fish are just as lovely as the big expensive ones, more so in my opinion, but I am biased, I do really like the smaller fish. Anywho though, these were just 10 cheap and very cheerful little species for you to consider if you're putting together a tank and looking to stock it without needing to take out a mortgage for it. But I hope you've enjoyed this little video. Happy fish keeping everyone, and I'll see you again soon. Bye bye!